Okay. So we have a Judah story in here, 38. And it's another famous story. And it's another Yahweh story. It's always about sex. Yahweh is very big. I guess he'd go over big on some of the, I don't want to say what kind of channels we're talking about today on the TV, but he knows how to grip his audience. And even though, as I said, this is Yahwist, it still seems pretty anti-Judah in the sense of his behavior. Anyway, it's they didn't know where to put it, so since they mentioned Judah in the Joseph story, they might as well put it here. It breaks the narrative of the Joseph story. And it really has nothing whatever to do with anything. It's just a separate series of stories. And I think it's part of something more. I think there was originally a much, probably longer series of Judah stories. But this is all that the narrator of this particular document has been able to put before us. Just like there's more to that Jacob and Reuben story than we have. Anyway, as usual, there's a problem with the women and conceiving and problems. So Judah had he had a wife from the Canaanites, interestingly enough, called Shua. So that's interesting that Judah, who's supposed to be this big Judean hero, has got a Canaanite wife. And he has some children there. Onan is one of them. So we get some genealogies mixed in. This is definitely Yahwist, you see. Offended the Lord Yahweh greatly, so Yahweh brought about his death. He took a wife for his firstborn heir named Tamar, but doesn't tell what this heir had done wrong. I don't know. It's a very fragmentary story. And then Onan is the other wife, or the other son. He says, take your brother's wife. Because the tradition was, and it's in the stories about David's parentage. David's parentage are not Jewish either, really. There's a woman, it's Boaz. What's the woman's name in the Boaz story? Ruth. And I think it is that Ruth's husband has died or something, and then she goes with the mother-in-law Naomi, and she's very faithful to Naomi. And then there's the problem that the brothers are supposed to raise up seed for the brother. That's the tradition. If your brother has predeceased you, you are supposed to take his wife so that the progeny shall be your brother's. It's like a representation. That's what's here. Now, that was considered a duty, I guess, in those days, and now Onan refuses because he knew the child wouldn't be his, line 9. And that's what we have in the John the Baptist story. You're not raising up seed unto your brother. You can't take your brother's wife, he says at one point in that story. But that story is all inaccurate anyway, because from the historian Josephus, we know that wasn't the situation at all. That story is totally inaccurate. But people know the John the Baptist story more than they know the real history of that period. And again, I do that in scrolls classes, but I've been teaching those recently. And the real history of it's sort of like people know the poetry. And as I think I've told you, poetry for people is truer than history. It doesn't matter what really happens, it matters what people think happened. And poetry is what people think happened, not what actually did happen. And, so poetry is easier for people than real history. So people know the John the Baptist story from the Bible, the New Testament, but they don't know it from the historian Josephus, which is much more complex. How is it more complex? if you look at the New Testament very closely, none of the Gospels know that Salome is the name of Herodias' daughter. They just say Herodias' daughter. We get Salome from Josephus. Josephus knows that her name is Salome, not from the New Testament. Yet we all know, we call her Salome, and the dance of the seven veils. There's no dance of the seven veils in Josephus. In fact, there's no dance of the seven veils anywhere that I'm familiar with, except in the people's imagination. In any event, it was Salome who was married to Philip, not her mother. If you look at Josephus' genealogies, and this Philip predeceased her, and Josephus says he didn't have children. And that's where you get the whole thing of raising up children unto your brother in that story, but it has nothing to do with her mother. And I don't want to go any deeper than that. You'd have to read Josephus, the historian of the period, who knows these people quite well. And the New Testament has very superficially swept the top of that story in order to present the death of John the Baptist. But in doing so, it tries to make it look as if Herod didn't want to kill him. Now, the problem that they're all called Herods at that time, but the actual person who, I can't even remember it all myself now, but the problem is that everyone wants to marry this Herodias woman because she represents the money line of this family, and she marries several of her uncles, which is a real problem in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But to make a long story short, Josephus makes it clear that Herod executes John the Baptist not because a woman danced, as the New Testament would present it, but because John was so popular that he was afraid that the people would do anything he might suggest, and therefore he thought that he might suggest the people to revolt, and lest he be regret having been generous afterwards, he thought he should execute him before this occurred. So it was preventive execution. So all that is fobbed over in the New Testament story with all kinds of misinformation and stuff like that. That is the difference of poetry and history. The poetry is much easier. The history is more complex. Even I can't hardly tell you the history. It's so complicated.